The Modo user interface is broken down into a series of tabs which are organized with the tools that you need for a specific section of your 3D workflow. Let's take a quick look at these tabs and the different aspects of the 3D creation workflow that are associated with each of them. So let's start by looking at the Model tab. This is going to be the default tab that you'll start out in when you boot Modo for the first time or when you load up Modo in general. Now, you'll see it highlighted here with the orange underneath the tab. That's how you know that it's the active tab. And now, as a note, you may start out with the tabs actually minimized, and you can minimize them at any time by clicking on the little double arrow on the left side of the tabs. And you can get those back at any time also by just mousing over the little space where the tabs are hidden and just clicking on that to reveal all of the individual tabs. So that just allows you to have a little bit of extra user interface space when you need it, and that way they can also just get out of your way in general. All right, so the modeling tab features a few things that we'll see kind of as common elements in pretty much most of the tabs. And that's going to be that on the left-hand side, we'll have some tools. On the right-hand side, we'll have some menus or other readouts that will give you things like the position, rotation, scale, items list, shader tree, things like that. And then in the center of the space, we'll have some kind of viewport. And sometimes we'll have a single viewport, and sometimes we'll have multiple viewports. All right, so let's move on from the modeling tab, which has pretty much everything that you need for object creation and manipulation, and we'll look at the other tabs. So the next tab over is the topology tab. Now, when I click into the topology tab, you'll see that we're greeted by one large window. That our tools on the left-hand side have changed, but everything on the right is pretty much the same. You'll also notice that the overall display here looks significantly different, and that's because this is showing our topology workflow. And basically what topology is the flow from polygon to polygon across the surface of a model. So you can use the topology tab to take something that has, say bad topology, either something that has been scanned by a 3D scanner, oftentimes has pretty messy topology, or something that has been sculpted very heavily, and a lot of times your topology will just kind of go bad while you're sculpting, and you're not worrying about that. You're worrying about the sculpting workflow at that point. And then you can use the topology tab to very easily kind of form fit cleaner geometry or cleaner topology over the top of existing geometry, and that's kind of what we see going on here. So the next tab is the UV Edit tab. We'll talk about this a bit when we get into adding textures to our objects, but the basic idea of a UV is that it is a 2D representation of an object in 3D space. So we'll see here that we have a sphere in our perspective view on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side we have essentially kind of like a bearskin rug of our sphere. And you can see if I mouse over and select some of these polygons, you'll see that all these polygons that I've selected here actually represent polygons in 3D space, but the whole thing has been kind of sliced and opened up so that we can see it in a flat view. That way we can put a two-dimensional texture onto this three-dimensional object, and if we do it well, we can do it without stretching or any kind of seams or anything like that. So once again, we have some separate specialized tools on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side again is pretty much stayed the same. Next, let's move over to the Paint tab. And the Paint tab actually has two different things going on in it. What you'll mostly work with inside of the Paint tab is painting textures or sculpting your models. So this is basically Sculpt and Painter all in one. Now, those are two things that can be very dependent on something like a Wacom tablet. So they go together very nicely, and they're both going to use a system of brushes. So when we get into looking at those things later on, we'll see how those kind of things apply here, and really why these two things exist in the same tab. So this is our sculpting and our painting, again here in the Paint tab. The next tab is the Layout tab. Now, the Layout tab can be used for a number of things, really. Largely it's going to be used not for modeling, but for actually placing your objects in space. And then also what you'll have access to here at the bottom is a list of presets. So if I go back here and we just go to meshes, you'll see that I have a whole bunch of different folders of different kinds of, in this case, models or meshes. There are also environments, materials, items, which are things like lights, assemblies, which we'll do with rigged pieces that we can look at later on. And so we have all these things here that will allow us to very quickly have access to a library of things that are preset content that comes with Modo, or as you start to create your own models that you want to use from scene to scene, you can populate your own folders or just fill up these folders with your own models. That way you can have them right here to easily access. Just a double click and they pop into your scene, and then you can start laying them out without having to worry about all of the different modeling tools getting in the way. This is just more for placing objects in space. The next tab is the Setup tab, and the Setup tab has really a lot going on here. This is going to be associated mainly with rigging, or setting up your scenes and your models so that they are ready to animate. And you also do sometimes a little bit of animation in here, but this is where we can do things like set up modifiers and deformers and different things that will cause objects to interact with each other, either based off of math or based off of the relationship from one aspect of a model to another aspect of either the same model or of a different piece in the inside of the scene. All right, so the Setup tab is where we'll do all of those things that will make our animation workflow all that much easier. Now the next tab over is the Game tab, and this is a very kind of multi-purpose tab, which is called the Game tab, but really can have a lot done with it. So you can see that we actually have a significant shift now in the way things look inside of the Game tab, and we have a perspective view. We have a render preview window, which is what every time you see this play button, that's going to be a render preview window. We have a schematic view here, which was also in the Setup tab, by the way. And then on the left-hand side, we have at default a bunch of stuff for setting up your objects for export to game engines. However, if you look here at the bottom of this tab, you'll see that we have some different buttons here. That right now we have Game Tools highlighted, and then in the bottom we also have Schematic and Preview highlighted. But we can change these things up in order to get different things that we might need. So you can see here, if I click on Scene, now instead of the Game Tools, we have our Scene Setup items. We can have our setup for sculpting and painting can pop in here, and we can also get our modeling tools in here. So this is a really nice multifaceted tab that depending on your workflow you may want to use a lot, because it can kind of become a Swiss Army tab where you can put a lot of different things in, and you can switch without having to switch tabs. You can switch workflows or switch within parts of workflows in order to kind of streamline your own personal process. So this is a good important tab, and if it's something that fits your work style, can be one that you'll spend a lot of time in. The next tab is the Animate tab, and the main thing here about the Animate tab is that you get a lot of space for, well, animating. Now, by default, your tab will probably look something like this, where you just have a big, large open workspace and your timeline and kind of your keyframing tools down here. So these are the tools that you'll use to set up your animations, which keyframes are going to be individual kind of poses, if you will, so places along the timeline where you want important things to happen, and then some other tools that will also help make animating a bit easier, like motion paths, dynamic parenting, and we'll get into those when we start animating a bit later on. Now, there are some other things that you may want when you're working in the Animation tab, and those really get in and out of your way relatively easily. So one thing here is, if we see on the lower right corner, I've got the side panel, which has things like the shader tree and the item list, so I can really quickly get access to things here to be able to pick and choose my items. And then the other thing here, the other button, is going to be our graph editor. And the graph editor is going to be a very important element to really fine-tuning our animations. And graphs are going to help us to get better quality animations without having to set just tons and tons of individual keyframes. We can get a lot of good work done just through the interpolation, or the way that the curves move between one keyframe and the next or the previous. All right, so moving on, we've got the Render tab here. And the render tab is where we will do setting up our lighting, we'll set up our textures, and a lot of other things here, because this is where we get our preview render along with our shader tree. So we get a very optimized view here just for getting a good look at how our finished render is going to look. And we can, in some instances, use this preview render to actually get our final renders out, either if we want to do things quickly and we want to get very optimized really low quality but quickly done renders, or if we want to take really high quality renders and we are really kind of not caring too much about how long they take, we can let them just kind of bake and bake away here until we get the best possible quality. And here we also have tools for finishing off and sending out final renders. Okay, so the last couple of tabs have to do with working with Mesh Fusion, which is a type of modeling workflow that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But the basic idea here is that we'll be taking multiple elements and combining them, or multiple meshes, and combining them in a number of different ways in order to get an interesting finished model that we really couldn't have easily done without using these kinds of workflows. So there is both a scripted tab and a schematic fusion tab, which will both allow you to get access to a bunch of the fusion tools, which you can also access in other places, but this is just giving you quick access to them here. So that's the basic look at all of these tabs. And one other option that you have here is you'll notice at each tab there is a small star to the left-hand side of what the tab is named. And these will allow you to kind of select favorites. And you can use this to simplify your tabs if you're either focusing on one area of your workflow, say you're focusing on kind of modeling and sculpting and maybe a little bit of rendering, you can just highlight those, and then when you click on the favorites only button, you'll see that we pop down to just model, paint, render. And that's going to allow me to just have those things there, maybe simplify my workflow a little bit. Or as you're learning, this might help you to kind of focus in on one specific area or a couple of specific areas without being distracted by the others. Once you start working in everything, you'll probably leave that off and just have access to everything, but it's there if you want to simplify your view and just streamline the things that you're looking at. So that's a basic look at the layout of Modo. In the next lesson, we'll start looking at some of the specific elements of working inside of Modo that will allow you to work with more power and more flexibility. That does it for this one. Thanks, and I will see you in the next lesson.